Be provocative, said Rory. So, at the expense of losing the later part of my talk, which you can catch up on, I'd like to engage in what I now know is called analog play. So if you could all look up from your devices for a minute, I'd like a show of hands. Are there any academics in the room? Oh, come on. That includes you, students. Any academics? Oh, you're going to be too shy to raise your hands, aren't you? Well, okay, take-home message one for the academics. For more than a decade, I've been teaching a course called the Aviation Model in Medicine to medical students. And this year, I heard on the grapevine that the National Health Service intends to set up a medical accident investigation board, and has chosen as the first chairman of said board a retired chair of the Air Accident Investigation Branch. So the message for academics, and I'm surprised you're not owning up to it, this time of year you are inclined to think that you have been talking in vain for decades, mainly because you have several hundred exam scripts indicating that you've been talking to professional non-listeners. But if you keep plugging away, even though I claim no credit for this, there is a slight danger that you will be heard. Any psychologists in the room? I can't believe you are all policemen and RAF officers. And this is an overlapping group with any psychologists? No? Okay. Bear with me, you need to hear the story about the second aeroplane. Okay? A bit of psychology history coming up on aeroplane number 2. Right. Anyone in the room working in marketing, advertising, sales? Okay, at last a show of hands. Well, it must be a really weird experience for you to have a disembodied voice coming at you. So my question for you is, why am I invisible? I hear all this about targeted marketing. No one's trying to sell to me. Now I understand that my daughter is an easier target, but the bad news is not every man my age has a daughter as a door into their wallet. So you could be missing a trick ignoring my demographic. And trust me, I feel very ignored. Right, so let's go flying. We've done almost everything else today, right? This landing, anyone you can walk away from is a good one, but technically this is a not quite right landing, illustrates the important message here that in some fields, insert whatever field you like here, you can get away with messing up. You could, for example, lose several £1 trillion and the taxpayer would simply give it back to you. But in purely hypothetical, but aviation is one of the few fields that still exacts the death penalty for a serious mistake, which means there's a lot of research into stopping mistakes before they happen. More or less what I've said here. And there might be some really useful messages there. Now, I was introduced to psychology by the late, great Donald Broadbent, and he told me, and I've no reason to disbelieve him, that he only went into psychology because the RAF taught him to fly in 1947 in this aircraft. It's North American Aviation T6, T for trainer, the boring way the Americans designate their aircraft, but the RAF give their aircraft names, and they weren't terribly imaginative. Does anybody know a North American training institution? Yes, it's a Harvard. So the RAF name is a Harvard. Very sorry indeed, Wing Commander dear, sir, the RAF taught me to fly too. But what interested Donald Broadbent as he learned to fly this aircraft is the RAF couldn't work out why so many people retracted the undercarriage while the aircraft was sitting on the ground. And with this particular aircraft, that could lead to substantial damage. It just seemed a very stupid thing to do. And he said, well, if the RAF couldn't work that out, there was clearly a job for him in psychology. And I would suggest to you, the psychologists in the audience, that you're listening to the birth of cognitive psychology. You see, he'd got to fly the aircraft, and these are the relevant controls. This is all under your left elbow, where a lot of important controls are, so you'd have to lift your left elbow to see them. The control that works the undercarriage is this one. The control that works the flap is this one with flap written on it. But before you can use either of them, you have to energize the air system by using your thumb on this tab here. Right? And he said, literally, if you couldn't see why people were getting confused with that, then clearly there was a role for psychologists. It's quite interesting because I've looked at some of the aviation accident investigation psychology at the time, and people then, back in 1947, were still writing papers saying people crash aircraft because they have unresolved Oedipal conflicts. They see the aircraft as some sort of a mistress, and therefore, their relationship with it is conflicted, and they hit the wrong lever. Obviously, cognitive psychology and Donald Broadbent went in a very different direction, including, let's put people in a lab. Let's test them with the controls and see which ones they get better. Collect the data instead of going in with these big previous hypotheses. Now, knowing that the aviation industry has, in fact, just mislaid a whole airliner full of passengers and so on, I can't say aviation gets it right, nor that aviation has all the answers. In fact, there are a number of unresolved research questions in aviation, nor that you simply map across from aviation, though I do applaud the decision of the NHS to have no blame investigation of medical accidents, but it's not the end of the story because I'm still saying at every medical conference, why aren't all operations routinely recorded? Right? It hardly would cost anything, and it's made such a difference in aviation. This is my summary of the aviation model. Right? So again, take-home message, the next is attributing blame doesn't help fix the problem. And it's just regarded as a truism in air accident investigations that an accident doesn't have a single cause, it has a long build-up of causes. And I may get on to talking about management and national culture. Once you start collecting data, you notice some airlines have lots of accidents, some airlines have very few, but even more spectacularly, some countries have lots of accidents, and some have very few. I hope I have time to think about that. So, whatever your beliefs about subconscious Oedipal conflicts and so on, you can't afford to assume, you can't afford to make any assumptions. Right? Collect the data, in fact, go in with a no assumption prejudice, which is the way aircraft accidents are typically investigated. No assumptions at all, leave your assumptions at the door. Blaming the user, which I find is typical in the IT industry. Everything is the user's fault. It's not that you've actually been given a phone with a crummy interface. It's not that the software or the website is almost impossible to use. No, you should have worked harder to learn it. Aviation dropped that one. And gathering data, very important. These paragraphs I just copied from the beginning of a report into an accident that I know very well. I was there. But it's worth saying, again, here it is spelt out, right? Not to apportion blame or liability, and accordingly, you can't take any part of this investigation. It's a very, very different sort of thing. How quickly the medical world will adapt to this, I don't know. But again, here is a take-home message for you. You don't have to do it the blame basis. I didn't ask for a show of hands from any lawyers. I'm not putting lawyers down. They have their role. If people mess up, maybe they should be sued. Right? But the aviation model, we investigate on a no-blame basis, and no blame means no blame. So, why not use pilot error? Why not blame the user? Well, we need to know why people make particular errors. Do pilots make errors? Oh, of course, all the time. Here's a list. It's not a complete list, it's just some of the major factors. Point number one, actually, tiredness. Here's another one I won't ask you how many hours a week you're working. I'll just say, maybe occasionally you should compare that with what, say, a lorry driver is allowed to work, and so on. And again, to every group of medics, I say, why do doctors work such long hours? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. You can give me a question. I think I know why doctors work such long hours, but the clear message from aviation is it will cause an accident. And I don't know how many of you are in companies that use the crunch when there's a deadline coming up, but again, overwhelming evidence from aviation that if people are going to make a mistake, they'll make it between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Right? Humans, even if they've slept all day, don't work very well then. Lack of attention, yep. And attention's a complex thing. Lack of training, for sure. There are lots and lots of cases of this. Lack of adequate information, which is often about the interface. Right? I did have a student years ago say, I'm not interested in human-computer interface. It's the Laura Ashley Department of Computing. So after that, I would say, okay, come with me. We're flying an Airbus 320 into Frankfurt, and we're 6 miles from touchdown, and start the watch, and say there's an alarm going off, what you're going to do, you're going to change mode, and so on. Now tell me human-computer interface, doesn't matter. Loss of situational awareness. Loss of situational awareness is one of the problems for which the aviation industry would still put its hand up. They're not really sure how to fix that problem. And again, if anybody wants to ask me about it, there is an accident in South America, the Cali accident. And last, right at the bottom there, is crew resource management, which is an under-researched area. But it emerged when people started data collection, when it was routine, it was compulsory to have a cockpit voice recorder in every airliner. This yielded a vast amount of data, particularly in the crash. And one of the things it showed for the psychologists, or the human factors experts, is that bad things were going on between the humans on the flight deck. Do you all know about the risky shift? How many people have heard of the risky shift? Okay. Pilots are taught about it. They have to learn. Okay, but it's so important in business, it's so important in banking, and so on. A shared decision, or a group, will take a more risky decision than an individual, right? Because they think they're sharing the risk. So, as part of flying, people are taught captaincy, which is you don't say, gentlemen, the weather's marginal in Toronto. Do you think we should try for it? Because they'll try for it. You say, weather's outside limits in Toronto, captain's decision is divert, and so on. But the flip side of that, revealed in the cockpit voice recorders, is the domineering captain and the compliant co-pilot, where the co-pilot clearly knows that the captain's doing something wrong, but hear the jargon carefully, fails to intervene effectively. Right? And this is the one that Gladwell makes a lot of. Gladwell's actually wrong in his book Outsiders. He says national culture is the most important factor. I've got lots of pictures of flight decks, but we'll just go on. The main one to show you is this. Modern airline flying is so boring that you are provided with a pull-out table so you can play computer games during the flight. No one knows because the cockpit's locked. This is an A320, and it's flown by a computer, basically, or a bank of 5 computers, and the crew they indicate their desires to the computer, and it decides whether or not they're allowed to do that via these computer side sticks here. When I say highly automated, I mean highly automated. And of course, Boeing have made an announcement that they think they can get the humans off the flight deck altogether. No news, actually, to get the humans off the flight deck altogether. The main reason they're there is people they think you won't get on unless there's someone in a uniform, preferably a blue uniform, up the front. The fact that they don't have much to do is neither here nor there. It reassures you to think that they're there. Current research topics. Okay, cultural variations, very important. Not as important as Gladwell says. Situational awareness and mode confusion. Easily summed up, really, in last words on voice recorders. If anyone's frightened of flying and get more frightened by what I'm saying, let me underline, it is the safest, if you fly on a scheduled airline, it's the safest way to travel in terms of passenger miles, and the journey from here to Heathrow by car is about 200 times more dangerous. Okay, Korean Airlines 801, the co-pilot says, "Captain, the weather radar has helped us a lot." That is this typical Korean co-pilot's attempt to draw the captain's attention to the fact that he's just about to fly into a mountain. In other words, I love that film. In fact, talking about the demographic, I saw it in the month of its release in a cinema. I wonder how many other people in the room can say that. And the captain says, yes, they are useful, and carries on to crash. It's not, as Gladwell says, the major factor in airline crashes, but it is a very important one. AF447, the mode confusion type of accident, often happens with highly automated aircraft. Right? Typical last words are, "Do you know what it's doing now?" Right? This Air France AF447, I recommend that you read the full accident report if you're interested in this at all, because it's a wealth of interesting information. It was an Airbus A319 flying from Rio to Paris, 2 o'clock in the morning, 10 past 2 to be precise. The air data computers lost input, handed over control to the humans. In the roughly 15 minutes that they had available, they failed to learn to fly the aircraft. Of course, they weren't helped by the software that was provided. They were handed an aircraft that had very different flying characteristics from the one they'd taken off in Rio. Only software can do this, and maybe it shouldn't. Also, the cockpit resource management was not quite right. The CRM was lamentably poor. The person actually handling the aircraft was the least experienced pilot. They called the captain, who was asleep, back to the flight deck because, intriguingly for a republic, power difference index is higher among pilots in France than any other European country. But when the captain came back to the flight deck, he just stood at the back and said, "Merde, ce n'est pas vrai," instead of basically taking control of the situation, because captaincy had... Yes, a great film. This is known as the startle effect. In fact, I'd like to, while I'm on the stage, I'd like to call out Tesla on this one, who are calmly blaming a human that they expect humans to take over control from their autopilot when it fails. Again, in aviation, the so-called startle effect is really well known. Humans cannot take over control from an automated system within a few seconds. In fact, Air France AF447 suggests even within a few minutes. So that's a really poor design. Shall I carry on? Okay. The aircraft's in a limp home mode called alternate law. Again, the software designers didn't help. Throughout for most of the incident, a loud warning of stall is playing on the flight deck, which is ignored by the crew because in normal mode, the aircraft they took off from Rio, you couldn't stall, so maybe they hadn't quite got with it at 10 past 2 in the morning. And the clever programmers thought if the forward speed drops below 60 knots, then there's no need to give the warning because clearly something's very wrong. Well, something was very wrong. The aircraft was falling tail first towards the ocean, whilst the crew believed they were overspeeding. Why you would stop the warning, I'm not really sure. But again, the humans got the blame for all this. And as in typical mode confusion, none of them actually realized what the aircraft was doing. Highly automated aircraft, lack of interface, If any of you work with IT, you should be seeing how problems are generated here. You're really not giving people enough information. Even highly trained, well-rested individuals couldn't actually solve this problem, which is why I say it's an interesting accident to read about. Mode confusion, plenty of work going on. So I'd just like to finish with a typical aviation saying, learn from the mistakes of others because you won't live long enough to make all of them for yourself. My only question to you is, why does it not apply to other fields? Why is it only in aviation that people have noticed that one?
Thank you very much. So I suppose what's funny? I've done something. Oh, it's the questions. Sorry, this social media, it's turned into sort of Grinder up there. I'm terribly sorry. Or the other one, whatever it's called.
I'm afraid I've no idea what Tara's doing
exactly,
later.
No. So here's an interesting question, a couple of questions, very quickly. Are you in favour of this? This is a question that appears elsewhere on the list. Are you in favour of this general policy that pilots should be forced to disengage the autopilot fairly regularly and fly themselves so they don't lose those kind of skills?
Mixed feelings. There's a lot of debate in the aviation community because a splendid piece of flying by Chesney Sullenberger, putting the aircraft down on the Hudson. But a lot of people with grey hair say he could only do that because he learned to fly in a Piper Cub. I flew one of them last week. And flew Phantoms in Vietnam, and when everything went wrong, he knew how to fly. The modern generation, these kids who've only been trained on simulators, flown highly automated aircraft, they wouldn't be able to do it. Whereas the airlines say, well, we're not interested in showboaters or people who can fly Piper Cubs. If we want an Airbus captain, then they might as well learn from the start on highly automated aircraft, because the skills they bring from what's essentially a motorized glider just doesn't apply to the air. And again, there's a big age split in the industry about this. And a suspicion, of course, that the airlines want to keep costs down. If you talk safety to airlines now, they tell you to shut up. They say, we're safe enough. How safe do you want us to be?
Just one other thing. Is there a fundamental difference? Someone who worked with Gerd Gigerenzer at the Max Planck Institute came from Lufthansa and looked at how the medical industry, the health industry, compared their whole approach to checklists and blame-free culture. Yeah. And they claimed that if Lufthansa borrowed their methods from a hospital, they'd lose a plane a week.
I think 2 a week.
You think 2 a week? Yeah. Interesting.
Well, it's my own experience. And I'm not criticizing the medics here, but I've shadowed an accident and emergency consultant and seen him trying to do things that aviation just accepted in the 60s, saying, no, please, we must go through the checklist, and they're all ignoring him. And trying to take control of a situation, saying, who's in charge of that monitor? No answer. Can we identify ourselves, please? No answer. Just trying to get the sort of discipline the pilots just accept. And the thing about recording operations is a good example. I'm reliably assured by people in the medical industry that it's coming. But if you talk to an airline pilot about cockpit voice recorder, they'd say it's made a great contribution to safety. It's the law. Of course, we all do that. They wouldn't see any problem with it.
The unions resisted it at first, didn't they? And I think it is.
And the airlines resisted it. Everybody resisted it. But particularly pilots said, "Oh no, so you're spying on us. Don't you trust us? We're professionals." So on all the things the doctors are saying now, but worldwide legislation, and it's made a massive contribution to safety.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic.